feeling golden, golden, golden. The simple things in life were right in front of me. I had to look twice, look twice, look twice. There was something I didn't see. Love is for everybody. Love will make you happy. You must trust in yourself. You won't get it from nobody else, nobody else. I'm feeling golden. I'm feeling golden. I'm feeling golden. I'm feeling golden, golden, golden. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
I think they like you, honey. I'm feeling golden, baby. Beautiful. And I'm so delighted you live in Salt Lake. So here we are, smack dab in the middle between our birth and our death. Trying to figure it out, right? Anybody not? That's the thing, you never really know where in the middle is. So, but I don't know why I said that. I just thought it was a kind of catchy way to get your attention. Except that we are here trying to figure it out. And so all religious traditions, all mythology, all legends, all of the wisdom through the ages helps us answer some fundamental questions. Who are we? Why are we here? So today, you get the final answer in 20 minutes or less. Isn't that amazing? You don't even have to work for it. I don't know why we're here, but I do know that we are created by the One. Now, I think it's interesting because really when you look at what is the purpose of religion, ultimately it is to help us to understand who we are, to bind us back to the divine in some way. And that's why we always say in our tradition, we bless all of the paths to the divine, because what we believe is that each of those gives us insight into the One. But none of us, or none of them, have an exclusive on truth. I reserve that for me. No, I don't. It just gives us insight into the One. And so when we're looking at this of who we are and why are we here, there's a number of different ways to approach that. So when I was a youngster growing up in a traditional church where they were imparting knowledge and wisdom, there was sort of that belief that many of us hold that says there is God and there's the devil. There's heaven and there is hell. There is good, there is evil. And everything was sort of about duality. And somewhere smack dab in the middle of that was my soul, trying to figure it out. So that's a lovely way to approach it, but it creates some issues, great issues for me, because there were some pretty exclusive rules around how you got to get into heaven, and I didn't qualify for most of them, so that was a problem. And so I began to explore different ways of doing this. And I always say the irony is that I never, ever, when I left church when I was 12 years old, my parents divorced, we didn't have to go to church anymore. I was like, there's a silver lining to every issue. And I was done. I didn't believe in organized religion. So, of course, I found us. So it still qualifies because we're anything but organized. But I was looking for something. And I discovered that doing it on my own was clearly not working. My best thinking was not getting me to where I wanted to be. So I began a search for how do I live life differently? I had horrible self-esteem. I didn't believe I deserved love. I didn't believe I just had this, it was a mess. And so that began a search and a journey. And as I began to become aware of this body of knowledge that we currently call positive mental attitude, I found books like Think and Grow Rich, and I found some things, and they talked about the power of our mind to attract into our experience who we believed we were. They didn't say it that way. They said things like what you think and believe, what you can think and conceive, you can achieve if you believe it, or some version of that. Sometimes I even know how to say that. I quote it correctly, but I never let that get in the way either. So, right? And so I began to embrace this body of knowledge. I was invited to go to wasn't called that, but a Center for Spiritual Living, and walked into a community not just like this. Bunch of ragtag people. They were just all full of themselves. They practiced self-love and acceptance and joy and all kinds of weird things that I never grew up with. I was like a fish out of water. I was like, huh? This ain't no church. You guys are happy. Why are you smiling? Why is everybody so nice, right? This isn't what I grew up with, right? But I began to hear a spiritual component to this thinking process. And I began to understand that there was another approach to reality. Rather than an approach of duality, there was an approach of unity. There was an approach that said there's only one life, there's only one power, there's only one intelligence, there's only one God. And so everybody is talking about the same thing, which is exactly what I believed as a young person. That's why church didn't work for me. It wasn't that I was so much against what I was hearing. It was I didn't like the fact that it was such an exclusive club. That, I used to say, they were telling me they were the only ones that were going to heaven, and they weren't any fun at all. I was like, well, that could be a long time. That could be a really long eternity, right? So then, in that understanding that there's only one life, and that life is expressing through all, I began to understand that life must be expressing through me. And so maybe I'm not this collection of mistakes. Maybe I'm not this person that I thought I was, but perhaps that same divine intelligence that expresses in and through and as all things is expressing through me. And so I began to work on a new structure. I've been invited to speak at the Big Sky Conference over Labor Day. Mary's happy about that. If you want to know anything about Big Sky Conference, talk to Mary. She's got one of those sashes. She's Miss Big Sky. And so they asked for a title, and I was like, So I'm going to test this out on you and see what you think. I'm thinking the title could be, what if it's all just BS? Because, of course, we all know that means belief systems, shorthand for... Oh, you knew that. I know you knew that. Right? Because what if it is all just belief systems? Really, if you think about it, if the divine is expressing through creation and we are individualized points within the whole, then the divine is creating through us, but it has to create according to something. And so we have developed a belief system, a belief structure of what is true. And that's the amazing thing about this universe, is that what we believe is true becomes our truth. I don't know if you've been watching. This is such an interesting election year, but man, there's some people that hold fundamentally different truths. It's like, are we all in the same country? Because this is wild, right? But people, you notice this, when people, they discover, this is my truth, and I will die for my truth, without sometimes being willing to re-examine. You see, I held a truth, but my truth was killing me. And so I had to re-examine what is true, what is real. As I began to re-examine that, again, I needed to let go of a system of duality and move into a system of unity, into oneness. Now, within the one, please let us understand, there is polarity. There are opposite energies. In the Taoist tradition, we know the yin and the yang. We know that speaks to this, that there's masculine and feminine, there's light and there's dark, but they're part of a one. They're not separate. And so I began to work on the only place that it turns out makes any difference, and that was on me. There's a great line from Aldous Huxley, who's brilliant, and he says to us, there's only one corner of the universe you can be certain of improving, and that's your own self. So I began a journey of, rather than trying to change my life, rather than trying to change the things around me, the people, the situations, where I lived and all that, I began to change my own internal universe. And I began to understand all of the things that I had grown up with in a new context and in a new way. I began to experience life differently. Because what I learned is what Ernest Holmes was teaching. Ernest Holmes, the founder of our teachings, who put lots of information together for us. But he says this to us. He says, you live because life lives in you. You move because there is a universal energy flowing through you. You think because there is an infinite intelligence thinking through you. You exist because the divine spirit has sought to individualize itself in and as you. This is why you are called the temple of the living God. There is a divine spark at the center of your being, but you need to recognize this, believe it, and act upon your belief. You see, if you are the living temple of the one life, and the spark of the divine is expressing through you, then you have an inherent responsibility to figure that out and live accordingly. Because the divine spark that lives in each and every one can only express itself more fully by giving it the fuel. Right? So a spark remains a spark until it has been given fuel to become a fire. And so we know people whose spark is still but a spark. We know them by their fruits. We know them by the way they talk. We know them by the way they show up in the world. We know them because sometimes they look back at us in the mirror. So annoying, right? Because if we didn't know that, then we might join those master teachers when they say, I am the life, I am the way, I am the truth. When they stand in the consciousness of the I am. The most powerful words that I know of in this universe are I am. And what follows those words defines our reality. And so often, what we like to do is argue for our limitation. We want to explain why we're not enough. We want to believe in our limitation. We want to believe in our stuff. And I would say that that's fine, but it won't get you to where you want to go. For me, my life wasn't working. My life was not working. It was evidenced by what was happening in my life. And so I kept thinking, because I had up at that time subscribed to the magazine of Change Your Circumstances, Change Your Life. And so I kept thinking that if I could just get the pieces moved around, then everything would be grand. But the problem was wherever I went, I was there with my own stinky consciousness, messing everything up. When I began to understand who I was, I started to talk about myself differently. I started to appreciate myself differently. I began to enjoy that, yes, I had made many mistakes, but my mistakes then were not something that were prohibiting my life, but rather was increasing what was possible for my life. Because as I always say, there's only two ways we ever figure out anything. One is by doing it right. Can you guess what number two is, right? We make mistakes, but we should not be bound by our mistakes. Rather, we can use those as opportunities for growth and for fulfillment and for moving forward. So Holmes says to us, he says, there's a divine spark at the center of your being, but you need to recognize it and believe it and act upon that new-founded belief. You see, this is the problem I find with spiritual growth, is that nobody can do it for you. Nobody can take your test, right? You know, sometimes people look to me, enlightened soul that I am. If you want to just breathe into this for a moment, right? And they say, fix me. Like I have that kind of power. And then when I don't, they get mad at me. Really mad. But you see, the power is always within us. You see, I join in the ranks of great people. You know, Jesus was reported to have walked through the world and gone to all kinds of people, and all kinds of people came to him with all kinds of issues. And he made some very famous statements. One of the great healing moments comes when somebody makes a request, places their prayer request with him, and he says, do you believe I can do this? He says, of course I do. And he said, then according to your belief, it shall be done. Now, I want you to hear those words. It took me many years before I heard those words. According to my belief, it shall be done. All of our lives are some reflection of our BS. Again, for those of you who didn't catch it the first time, our belief systems, we're just using a little shorthand here. All of our lives are some collection. And so some points are joyous and wonderful and unfolding, some are not. It doesn't mean we get to control everything that happens in our life, but we do get to control our universe, our corner of the universe that responds to what's happening in our life. So the Master says, it is done unto you as you believe. According to your faith, you shall be made whole. So there's always a co-creative agent in this creative process. There's always our own being that we bring to the experience. I'm reminded, because when I was a kid, I grew up with a literal version of the Bible. Then I found us, and we're kind of free-thinking, you like the story, let's just work with the story, right? But again, because mythological understanding, metaphorical, mystical understanding doesn't look at literal stories, but looks at the symbology behind it. So there's a wonderful story of Jesus standing on the shore, calling to Peter in the boat, saying, come here, walk to me. Now, I'm guessing Peter's already seen Jesus do it, but he's Jesus. You'd expect him to walk on the water, right? But now, Jesus is saying, Again, so get this, the Christ, the divine presence, is saying to Peter, which is symbolic for faith, upon this rock I shall build my church. And, Peter's like all of us, like, dude, really? I don't know if the term dude had been invented yet, but some term, But he does this. And so he steps out on the water, and he begins to walk towards the master because his eyes and his attention and his consciousness are fixed on his destination. They're fixed upon the Christ. But then he does something. He looks down. Somebody said after the first service, kind of reminded me of, like Wile E. Coyote. There's always that moment like, I'm fine. Oops. You find truth wherever you look for truth, right? And he begins to sink. And Jesus is saying to him, you see, your faith, you lost your faith. So again, we're not looking at this to be a historical, accurate story. We're looking at it to understand that there's a way of being in the world. Dr. Holmes said to us in a wonderful book called Spiritual Awareness, he said, the spiritual genius of Jesus enabled him to see that each is a unique, individualized expression of the one mind. Each and every one of us is a unique, once-in-a-lifetime expression of this divine mind. And he says the mind of God at the center of every person's being ever awaits its acceptance, knocking at the door of his intellect for admission. The consciousness that walked over the troubled waters of human experience, the inner calm that stilled the tempest, is accessible to everyone. I'm going to venture a guess that every person in this room today has some area of life that looks like troubled waters. You may have 95% of it all worked out. And then there's this one little area of troubled waters. Now, we can judge ourselves. It won't get us there. We can blame others. It won't get us there. It is until we move into that awareness and that understanding. As Ernest said, the consciousness that walked over the troubled waters of human experience, the inner calm that stilled the tempest, is accessible to everyone. And so our work, my friends, as spiritual beings, having this human experience in the world, is to draw deeply upon that inner awareness. And we begin to realize that these powerful words that we use over and over become part of the way we define our reality. You see, these are very powerful words. Remember Moses? Of course you do. You do, all right? I mean, just give me a nod or something. Okay. Moses, Bible, Old Testament, led the people. Charlton Heston, okay, there it is. Before he had a gun, he had a rod. Okay, so goes up to the mountaintop to have this encounter with the divine. And it fundamentally changes him, and his hair goes white, and all kinds of things happen. And he's having this encounter of the divine, and he asks, who shall I say sent me? And in these words, which aren't really translated well in English, but they say, tell him the I am that I am has spoken. The I am that I am. More appropriately translated, it would be something along the lines of, I am that which causes all things to be. But it has a quality of being. So when we begin to discover our voice, we begin to utilize, we realize we've been given this gift of potentiality, that the divine spark has already been placed within us. You see, we do not need to go in search of the divine spark. It exists. It lives in our being. It is freely given. But we do indeed get to figure out how to use that divine spark, how to bring more of that forward, how to be more expressed in the world. And we do that by how we speak of who we are. I've noticed sometimes, you know I love to make you do affirmations here. And I like to chastise you, and I make you stand up and throw your arms around and do all this stuff. You're like, why do you make us do this? It's because I want you to get it. You see, that's what you do when you're talking about your problem. Oh my God, you cannot believe my boss. Right? Now I'll do my affirmation. I am a child of God. All that I need comes to me. Life is good. Right? The universe is listening. It's not only listening to what you say, it's listening to how you say it. And according to your faith, it shall be so. I know it feels unusual to talk well about yourself. It's not a skill most of us developed as young people. But you know what? It starts to feel pretty good. And then, as we are finding our voice and speaking from a place of power, knowing that the divine spark lives within us, knowing that the universe is behind us, knowing that the universe is seeking its highest expression through us, it gets easy. And lo and behold, if things don't begin to change around us, because we've created a new vibration in which our good can come to us. This intelligence, this law of mind that we speak to so often is neutral. It's not playing favorites. It's simply bringing forward according to the consciousness that has been established. And so if we argue for our limitation, we find our limitation. But if we speak the word of truth of our own inherent greatness, then we bring that forward as well. Now, I know you're thinking, I don't want to be arrogant. Well, I don't want you to be arrogant. We have plenty of arrogance enough. We do not need more arrogant people. But we do need more conscious and more powerful people. So, a lawyer, I know, let's have a moment of judgment, because it was a lawyer. Any lawyers in the room? Sorry, that's just a joke. But we do have issues around lawyers if you listen to how people speak, right? Well, they've always been troublesome, it turns out. In the early days, a lawyer went up to Jesus to test him, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read?" And he said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. And you should love your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have answered right to this, and you will live." You see, Jesus was speaking to a person who was kind of like people we know. Like, which of these principles do I have to practice to get what I want? When it's really about a way of being. And so he said to him, here's what I want you to do. I want you to love God, the divine, this life, this power, this presence, with all your heart, with all your soul, with your mind, with your very being. In other words, go all in. And then love your neighbor as you love yourself. So we have to test. How well do you love yourself? Anyone want to go first? No. Right? Because here's was my experience. I know that this will shock you, but I'm going to just say it. I was a very judgmental person early on. I know, it's shocking. because I had so much self-judgment, so much self-loathing, so much self-stuff that everywhere I looked in the world, I saw a reflection of me, and it was not pretty. As I began to do that inner work, as I began to love and appreciate myself, as I began to see my mistakes as not defining me, but actually helping to guide me towards greater good, as all that began to change, lo and behold, if I didn't stop judging other people, they all got better somehow. I don't understand it, but it happened, right? So what I want us to understand, I grew up in a tradition that essentially said, don't be too full of yourself. Don't be arrogant. Don't take too much. Don't blah, 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 blah. You're a small worm of the earth. Thoughtful. Now, go have a great life. Okay? So I'm not asking you to go be arrogant. In fact, part of what comes with this whole thing is a sense of profound humility. Because not only do I carry the spark of the divine, so does everyone and everything. And my job as a spiritually aware being is not only to work forth, to bring that forth within myself, but to ignite that in everyone I meet through the power of transformative love. I have met the I am that I am. And so in that meeting, I realized I am the one that causes all things to be in my life. I am the one that is directing this experience. And I am the one who is either speaking truth or error, who is living more engaged or living in an old version of myself. I find myself from time to time going back there. It's still not a pleasant place to live, so I don't stay there. Right? So each one of us gets to find and discover our true voice, to speak from a place of power, to speak from a place of clarity, to speak from a place of conviction of our inherent wholeness. And as we do so, then greater good comes to us. Because when we vibrate at a different level, we attract things at a different level. It's so simple. You'd think we'd figured it out a while back. But we know it now. So this is the moment of new creation. This is the moment of new possibility. You can look, as Peter did, at the Christ, at the vision, or you can look at the problem. What we discover is we focus on the problem, that becomes our experience. But if we can develop that level of consciousness that rises above, that stills the waters, then we find peace in our world. It's not to say we don't have challenges, we don't have problems, we don't have situations, but we can rise above that and live with a greater way of possibility. So my friends, I want to invite you to join me in continuing this journey of living according to those principles that were set forth many years ago. To love the divine with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your mind, all of your being. And to love your neighbor as yourself. Let us pray. As we simply breathe into this moment, as we breathe into the divine possibility that is resident within us, and as we recognize that it is not even our own breathing, it is us being breathed by that divine intelligence. We sense and feel and know this one power, this one life, this one infinite expression is our very life and being. And that whatever name we give it, it's larger than that. So for this moment, we call it the divine. And we recognize this divine intelligence expressing through our heart as unconditional love and through our mind as perfect wisdom. We allow ourselves to experience the fullness of being. We sense and feel and know our inherent magnificence. And as we do so, we begin to discover a new voice, the spiritual voice of truth, calling forth a new reality, releasing those things which no longer serve us, releasing those limiting ideas, releasing our littleness, stepping into our inherent spiritual divinity. We call forth the presence of love, for love indeed is the only reality. We choose in this moment to experience full, complete, unconditional love, which fully and freely forgives, which releases and lets go. We choose to love ourselves as we love all those around us, seeing the inherent divine spark. We allow ourselves to be set free into new possibility. We call forth the presence of wholeness, that wholeness that expresses in and through and as all creation, through every cell and every system of our physical being, at every level of our physical and emotional and mental and spiritual being. We're calling forth that wholeness, experiencing health, well-being, vitality. We know that we are abundant beings because we are one with the source, with the creative intelligence that has brought all things into being. So we open ourselves to experience greater flow, greater good. Joyously we receive, generously we give of this divine bounty. For it is at all a divine flow of life. I invite you in this moment to take that which is no longer serving you, that limiting idea, that worn out belief, and to let it go. To simply imagine it as if it were a balloon, a helium balloon floating off into the nothingness. And in its place to recognize the inherent wholeness and the divinity of who we are. In this moment, we are healed according to our own belief, according to our own faith. And so it is with a profound sense of joy and gratitude that I give thanks that this is so. It is with a profound sense of being that I declare this to be the truth. For I know that we are blessed, blessed beyond measure. And that as we experience this blessing, as we give thanks for all of it, our lives are increased and expanded, and we then in turn extend the blessing. We bless this spiritual community, knowing that it is divinely guided and unfolding perfectly. We extend this blessing to our brothers and sisters, not only in this country, but around the world, because there is a spiritual brotherhood and sisterhood of all humanity. We are all finding our way forward together. So we bless every man, woman, and child. We bless the planet herself with all of her creatures and all of her inhabitants. We take a moment, as we always do, to bless all priests, rabbis, ministers, teachers of every faith, for we honor and celebrate the many pathways to the divine. We allow our lives to be a living testament to the goodness of the divine, and for that we are grateful. So giving thanks for all of this and so much more, giving thanks for a law of mind operating upon the consciousness that we establish here, I simply give thanks. I allow it to be so, as together we say, and so it is.